So in this tutorial we're going to learn how to create these waves which are made with increases. Here you can see the stitches split into two, and decreases. So you can see here these stitches have been decreased into this one here. And we have left and right leaning decreases. So these are the most basic increases and decreases that you can do in brioche knitting. So if you haven't already had a look at our tutorial for doing a basic brioche rib, or if you haven't done any brioche knitting at all before, I'd recommend having a look at that first. I'll put a link at the top because that will give you the basic stitches that you will need to learn and master really before you have a go at this. Okay, so let's get started. I've got my double knit yarn. Again, you can use whatever you've got to hand, and I'm using 3.5mm needles. Again, I'm just using the small double pointed ones just because it's easy for the video. You don't have to use double pointed needles. You could just use your normal straight needles or circular, whichever you prefer. So it does need to be quite a stretchy cast on or a loose cast on. So you can do that over 2 needles, or if you can do the Italian cast on, then feel free to do that. I'm just going to do a loose long tail cast on for this sample. So we're going to cast on 21 stitches. So that's my first stitch, that's 2, and I'm keeping these really loose, not tightening them much at all. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So just carry on with your cast on, keeping it nice and loose until you get to 21 stitches. So I've got my 21 stitches, and now we're going to work our contrast side setup row. So we're going to start by slipping one with the yarn in front. Then I'm going to take the yarn between the needles to the back, and we're going to knit 1 stitch. Then we're going to bring the yarn to the front and slip 1 yarn over, and then knit 1, slip 1 yarn over. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the slip 1 yarn over stitch. If you want to learn how to do that in a bit more detail, pop along to our first tutorial, and that will explain how to do that stitch. So we're just working our way along, slip 1 yarn over and knit 1 all the way along, and this is just our setup row until we get to that last stitch. So we've got a knit 1, then we're going to bring the yarn between the needles to the front and just slip that last stitch with the yarn in front, and that's our setup row done. We've worked our setup row, and now we're just going to do a few rows of normal plain brioche rib. So we're starting on our main side row. So we're going to knit this first stitch, bring our yarn between the needles to the front, slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit, and then we're just going to continue to slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit all the way along. So yarn between to the front, slip 1, brioche knit, yarn front, slip, brioche knit, front, slip, brioche knit, and just continue like that all the way along this first main side row. Slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit, until we get to those last 2 stitches. We're going to slip 1 yarn over and then just knit that last stitch. So now we're on our first contrast side normal row, so we're going to hold the yarn in front of the needle and just slip that first stitch, take the yarn between the needles to the back and brioche knit. Yarn between the needles to the front, slip one, brioche knit, yarn front, slip one, brioche knit, and just carry on all along this row, slip one yarn over and brioche knit. So this is just the basic brioche rib. If you haven't done this before, then like I said, if you have a look at our previous video, that will give you some more detailed instruction. So we're just the last few stitches, brioche knit, bring the yarn between the needles to the front and slip that last stitch purlwise. Okay, so now we're just going to repeat those 2 rows again. So we've got a main side, knit 1, slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit to the end, and then the contrast side, slip with yarn in front, brioche knit, slip yarn over to the end. So if you just work those 2 rows again, the main side and the contrast side. So now we're ready to start our first increase and decrease row. So this is a main side row. So we're going to start by knitting that first selvage stitch. Okay, then we're going to bring our yarn to the front and slip 1 yarn over. So we're always going to keep that same format of 1 slip 1 yarn over stitch, 1 knit stitch, slip 1 yarn over, knit, and we're always going to keep that format even when we're doing the increases and decreases. So we've done our first knit stitch, we've just done a slip 1 yarn over, we're going to brioche knit the next stitch, and now we're going to do a slip 1 yarn over, so yarn front, slip. So this is our first increase stitch, and we're working it into one of the brioche knit stitches. So we're going to insert our needle as though to brioche knit, wrap the yarn around, pull the loop through, but don't slide the stitch off the left needle. Instead, we're going to wrap the yarn round again, so between the needles to the front and over the top. Now what you want to try and do is to get this yarn over to sit next to your first stitch. You don't really want this crossing, it's quite difficult to see on the return row if you do that. Just try and line them up neatly. So we've done our yarn over, and then we're going to knit into the same stitch again and try and keep our stitches all neatly lined up. So that was a brioche knit, yarn over, brioche knit, all in the same stitch. So now we're going to do a slip 1 yarn over, so yarn to the front, slip, brioche knit, slip 1 yarn over, and now we're going to work our first decrease. Now this is a left leaning decrease, which is the easiest one to learn. So we've got our brioche knit stitch next, and we've got our slip 1 yarn over here on the needle. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to slip this brioche knit stitch here, and we're going to slip it knitwise. So we're putting our right needle tip through both the loops as though we're going to brioche knit, but just slide this off the needle. And now we're going to knit our next 2 stitches together. Now remember that when we talk about stitches in brioche knitting, the slip stitch with its yarn over count as 1 stitch. So when we say we're going to knit 2 stitches together, we're really knitting these 3 loops. So we're going to insert our needle into that first brioche knit, that first slip 1 yarn over, sorry, and then into the stitch, and we're going to bring our yarn right from over here and knit that stitch. Now you can see it's quite a long slip-on yarn over that we've created here, so we're just going to give that a wiggle and tighten it up just a little bit. We don't want it too tight. And then this first stitch, so this slip-on yarn over with its little yarn over, we're going to pass that back over the stitch we've just knitted. So just get your left needle tip into those two loops and pop that over the stitch and off the needle. Okay, and that's our first left leaning decrease. Okay, now we're just going to continue to slip one yarn over, so yarn front, slip one, brioche knit to the end. So yarn front, slip, brioche knit, yarn front, slip, brioche knit. So just working like that all the way to the end. So the last two stitches, slip one, yarn over, and then just knit that last selvage stitch. There we go. So you can see here the bottom of the piece is starting to wave slightly. That's absolutely fine, that's what it's supposed to do, so don't worry if the bottom of your knitting is no longer straight. So now we're ready to work our contrast side row. We've got the yarn in front of the needle and we're going to just slip that one across and then take our yarn to the back between the needles to brioche knit. Okay, now we're going to carry on doing the usual slip one yarn over brioche knit 6 times. That's 1, 2, oops, 3, slip one yarn over brioche knit 4, slip one yarn over brioche knit 5, slip one yarn over brioche knit 6. Okay, so what we're up to now is where we increased on the previous row. So you can see, instead of having your usual alternating wrap stitch, plain stitch, we've now got these 3 single loops on their own. So we need to work these 3 loops that were part of our increase separately. So the first thing we're going to do, we've just done our brioche knit, so we'll bring in the yarn between the needles to the front and we're going to slip yarn over the first stitch. Now the second stitch we're just going to knit, and that last stitch is another slip one yarn over, so yarn between the needles to the front and just slip. And now that's turned those stitches into the brioche sort of format. So we've got our slip one yarn over, knit one, slip one, yarn over, and then we're going to just brioche knit, slip one yarn over, brioche knit, slip one with the yarn in front to finish that row. So with a lot of brioche patterns you will find that the increases and decreases are performed every alternate main side row. This isn't always the case, but it is the usual way to do this. So now we're just going to work 2 normal brioche rib rows. So we're going to start with our main side. So we're going to knit that first stitch, slip one yarn over, brioche knit, yarn to the front, slip, brioche knit, and just work your way across this row until you get to that last stitch, and then we're just going to knit that last stitch. Okay, so now we're on our contrast side. So we're going to just slip the first one with the yarn in front, yarn between the needles to the back, brioche knit, yarn front, slip, brioche knit, and just continue to slip one yarn over, brioche knit until you get to the end, and then you're just going to slip that last stitch with the yarn in front, just like a normal brioche rib row. Now we're on to our next increase decrease row to create the pattern. So we're on a main side row, so we're going to knit that first stitch, and then we're going to bring the yarn between the needles to the front, slip one, brioche knit, and we're going to do that one more time. So slip one yarn over, brioche knit. Okay, so now we're ready for another increase. So we're going to slip one yarn over, and then we're working into this wrapped stitch. So we're going to do a brioche, yarn over, brioche, all in the same stitch. So we're going to knit the first stitch, but leave your loops on the hook, on the needle. Then we're going to yarn over, again trying to line up the stitches so they're not overlapping, and then knit again into that same stitch. So there you can see we have our 3 stitches, so we've increased 2, and that's our increase. Okay, so now we're just going to slip one yarn over, brioche knit, slip one more yarn over, and now we're ready for our left leaning decrease again. So we're going to slip this stitch here, so that's the 2 loops. We're going to slip that knitwise, and then we're going to knit together these 2 stitches, so we're going through 3 loops. Okay, and then we're going to pass over the stitch that we previously slipped, so that's the 2 loops here. Pass that stitch over, and then just give it a little gentle tighten at the back, and there you can see it's leaning to the left. So now we're just going to bring the yarn between the needles to the front, slip yarn over, brioche knit all the way to the end, where we'll just knit that last selvage stitch. So now we're on our contrast side row after we've performed a increase, so we have to remember to work these 3 stitches here separately. So we're going to slip one with the yarn in front, brioche knit, and then we're going to slip one yarn over, brioche knit 5 times. So slip one, brioche knit, slip one, that's 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can see we've got these 3 stitches here that are unworked, so we're going to bring our yarn between the needles to the front, slip that first stitch on its own, and then we're just going to knit the next stitch as normal, yarn between the needles to the front, and slip that 3rd stitch, and then we're ready to brioche knit and slip one yarn over to the end. Then we're going to bring the yarn to the front between the needles and just slip that last stitch. So as before, we're now going to work 2 plain brioche rib rows. So we're going to start with our knit first stitch, slip yarn over, brioche knit, slip, brioche knit, and just continue all the way to the end. So we've worked one main side plain brioche rib row. Now we're going to work the contrast side. So we've got our yarn held to the front, we're going to slip that first stitch, yarn to the back, and then we're just going to brioche knit, slip yarn over all the way to the end, and then we're just going to slip that last stitch with the yarn in front. So we're on to our next increase decrease row, and if you're following on the pattern, this is row or step 5, and we're obviously on a main side. So we're going to knit that first stitch, bring the yarn between the needles to the front, and we're going to slip one yarn over, brioche knit 3 times. So once, twice, 3 times. Okay, now we're going to slip yarn over this next stitch, and then we're going to do a brioche knit, yarn over, brioche knit, all in this next stitch. So we knit and keep the stitches on the needle, yarn over, making sure we line the stitch up, not cross it over, and then knit again into that same stitch, and then we can slide it off, and then we've got our 3 loops. So then we're just going to bring the yarn to the front, slip yarn over, brioche knit, slip yarn over, and now we're ready for our next left leaning decrease. So we're slipping this first stitch, so that is the stitch with its yarn over, knitwise. Then we're going to knit these 2 stitches together, so we're going through the 3 loops, and then we're passing the stitch, so the 2 loops, over the top and off the needle, and then we're just going to give that a little tighten at the back, and then we yarn between the needles to the front, slip one yarn over and brioche knit until we get to that last stitch, and then we're just knitting as normal at last stitch. So now we're going to work our contrast side row after an increase and decrease. So we've got our yarn held to the front, slip that first stitch, yarn to the back, brioche knit, then we're going to slip one yarn over, brioche knit 4 times. 1, 2, 3, and slip one over, brioche knit, that's 4. Okay, so you can see we're up to our increase. We've got these 3 single stitches. So again, we're going to yarn front, slip the first stitch, and single knit the second stitch, yarn to the front, slip yarn over that 3rd increased stitch, and then we're back to brioche knit, slip yarn over, brioche knit to the end. And then yarn front and slip that last stitch. So you can see now you've got that left leaning decrease, and the increase is here. You can see the pattern starting to form. As before, we now need to just work 2 plain ribbon rows. So we're going to start with our main side. So knit 1, slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit, all the way to the end. And again, just a plain brioche rib on the contrast side. So we're slipping this first stitch with the yarn in front, brioche knit, slip, yarn over, brioche knit all the way along to the end. And then you're just going to slip that final stitch. Our next increase decrease row is step 7 on the instructions, and it's a main side row. So we knit in, slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit 4 times. 1, 2, 3 and 4. And then we're going to slip a yarn over this next stitch, and we're going to do our increase. So we brioche knit, yarn over, brioche knit, all into that same stitch. Slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit, slip 1 yarn over, and then we're going to do our left leaning decrease. So we're slipping knitwise, knitting 2 together, so through 3 loops, passing the slipped stitch over, and then just giving that a little gentle tighten. And we're going to slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit till the end, and just knit that last stitch. Step 7 contrast side row now. So I'm going to slip that first stitch with the yarn in front. Just going to make sure that the loop that's on that first stitch is pulled down, so that I'm actually working into the stitch here and not the loop there. So just pull it forward and slip with the yarn in front. Take the yarn between the needles to the back to brioche knit. And then we're just going to slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit 3 times. So that's 1, 2, yarn front, slip, brioche knit. Okay, that's our 3. So now we're working into the 3 stitches here from the increase in the previous row. So yarn front, slip the first one, knit the second one, yarn front, slip the third. Now we're going to brioche knit and just continue to slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit until we get to that last stitch. So yarn front, slip, brioche knit, yarn front, slip, brioche knit, and then we're just going to bring the yarn front between the needles and slip that last stitch. As before, we're going to continue to do normal plain brioche rib. This time, instead of just doing 1 set of main side contrast side brioche rib, we're going to do 3 lots. So we're going to do main side contrast side, main side contrast side, main side contrast side in plain, slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit all the way along. I've completed the 3 sets of the plain brioche rib, so that's a main side and a contrast side row 3 times, and now we're on our next increase decrease row, and this is step 11. So we're going to start by just knitting our selvage stitch, yarn between the needle to the front, and we're going to slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit 4 times. So that's 1 yarn front, slip, brioche knit 2, 3, and slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit, that's our 4. Okay, now we're going to learn a new decrease. Now this is a right leaning decrease. So we're going to just slip this first stitch, slip 1 yarn over. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is, as we did last time, we're going to insert the right tip into the first stitch, so that is the stitch with its yarn over, knitwise, and slide that off the needle. Now we're going to knit this next stitch on its own, and now we're going to use our left needle tip to lift that first slip stitch, so that's the 2 loops, the stitch and its yarn over, and pass that over and off the needle. Now we're going to move this stitch onto the left hand needle purlwise, so you just need to position your needles so they're facing each other and just slip it across. We're then going to pass this next stitch, so that's the stitch with its yarn over and off the needle. Now this can slide across quite a bit and risk this stitch sliding off as well, so it does help if you kind of hold it at the back as you slip that over the front and then off the needle. Okay, and the last step is to pass this stitch purlwise back onto the right hand needle, so we just needle tips together, sliding that across. Okay, now I like to slide the stitch up to the other ones and just tighten a little bit like that, not too much, just so that it's neatly in line, and that's your right leaning decrease. So now we're going to slip one yarn over, brioche knit, slip one yarn over, and now we're going to do our usual brioche knit, yarn over, brioche knit increase. So we're doing all that in this next stitch. So we're going to brioche knit, don't take the stitch off the needle, yarn over, and brioche knit again into the same stitch, and that's our increase. And then we just slip one yarn over, brioche knit, slip one yarn over, and knit that last selvage stitch. So we'll work the contrast side row now, and we're just going to yarn in front of the needle, and I'm going to slip the first one, yarn between the needles to the back, and then we're just going to brioche knit, yarn front, slip yarn over, brioche knit. Okay, now we come to the 3 stitches that were our increase. So we're taking the yarn between the needles to the front, slip yarn over, knit the next single stitch, and then we're going to slip yarn over, and then we brioche knit the next one, and we're just continuing to slip one yarn over, brioche knit all the way along until we get to the last stitch. So slip one yarn over, brioche knit, slip one yarn over, brioche knit, yarn between the needles to the front, and we're just slipping that last selvage stitch. So if we just take a quick look at our piece here, you can see there's our right leaning decrease, and it's starting to bring all the stitches round to the right, so it's making them all curve round to the right now. So we've just done our contrast side row, so now we're going to work a main side, and as before we're just going to do a main side and a contrast side row of plain brioche ribbing. So we start on the main side, knit one, slip one brioche knit all the way along, so slip one brioche knit until we get to the end, and then we're just knitting that last stitch. And then if you work a contrast side row in the plain brioche ribbon, and that will be step 12. I've worked my 2 rows of plain brioche rib, and now we're on to step 13, which is a main side row, and again it's another increase decrease row. So we're just going to knit that first selvage stitch, yarn between the needles to the front, and we're going to slip one yarn over and brioche knit, and we're going to do that 3 times. Then we're going to slip one yarn over, and we're doing another right leaning increase. So we're slipping the first stitch, so that's those 2 loops knitwise onto the right hand needle. We're knitting the next single stitch. We're passing these 2 loops that were slipped over and off the needle. We're passing the single stitch back across to the left needle. We're going to hold that with our fingertip and pass the next stitch, so that's these 2 loops, over and off the needle. And last step, bring the stitch purlwise back onto the needle, slide it up and just tighten, and there we go, that's our right leading decrease. So then we've got our slip yarn over, brioche knit, slip yarn over, and we're going to do our brioche increase. So we've got a brioche knit, yarn over, lining up those stitches, and a knit back into the same stitch. Then if we just slip yarn over, brioche knit right to the last 2 stitches where we have a slip yarn over and a knit one. Now we're going to work our contrast side row. So we've got the yarn held to the front, slide, make sure that's the stitch I'm working into, slip the first stitch, yarn between the needles to the back, brioche knit, and then we're going to slip one yarn over, brioche knit, and we're going to do that twice. And now we're working into the 3 loops of our increase here. So slipping the first stitch with its yarn over, knit the next stitch, yarn front, slip yarn over that last stitch, and then we're going to brioche knit and just slip yarn over until we get to that last stitch. So yarn front, slip, brioche knit, front, slip, brioche knit, bring the yarn to the front and just slip that last stitch. Go ahead now and, as before, just work a main side and a contrast side plain brioche rib. So we just slip one yarn over and brioche knit. We're up to step 15 now, and I've just done my 2 rows of plain brioche knit rib, and now I'm on my main side increase decrease row. So we're going to knit that first stitch, yarn between the needles to the front, slip one yarn over, brioche knit twice, and then we've got our slip yarn over, and we're going to do a right leaning decrease. So we're slipping that first stitch with its yarn over, knitting the next stitch, passing those 2 loops over, placing the single stitch onto the left needle, passing those 2 loops over, back onto the right needle, slide along and just gently tighten up. Okay, yarn front, slip one yarn over, brioche knit, slip one yarn over, and then we're doing our brioche knit increase. So knit, yarn over, knit into the same stitch, and just continue to slip one yarn over, brioche knit until you get to that last stitch, and then we're just going to knit that last stitch. And now we're working back along our contrast side. So we're going to slip that first one with the yarn in front, yarn to the back between the needles, and we're going to brioche knit that first stitch. Now we're going to slip one yarn over and brioche knit, and we're going to do that 3 times. 1, 2, yarn front, slip, brioche knit, and that's our 3. And now we're up to these 3 single stitches which were from the increase in the previous row. So yarn forward, slip the first one, oops, knit the second one, slip, yarn over the third one, and then we're just going to brioche knit and continue to slip, yarn over, brioche knit until we get to that last stitch. Yarn front, slip, brioche knit, and then yarn front and just slip that last stitch. Just work a main side and a contrast side plain brioche rib. So we just slip one yarn over and brioche knit. And now we're on our main side row again. We've worked our 2 plain brioche rows and we're going to knit that first stitch. So this is step 17. Yarn front between the needles, slip yarn over, brioche knit, and yarn forward, slip one yarn over, and now we're going to do a right leaning decrease. So we're slipping that first stitch, so those 2 loops knitwise, we're knitting the next stitch, passing the 2 loops over, we're putting the stitch onto the left hand needle, passing those 2 loops over, and the stitch then goes back onto the right needle, and we can slide that along and just tighten that up a little bit. Now we've got a slip one yarn over, brioche knit, and another slip one yarn over, and we're ready for an increase. So we're doing brioche knit, yarn over, making sure our stitches line up, brioche knit, all in that same stitch. So that's our increase done, and now we're just doing slip one yarn over, brioche knit until we get to the end. Yarn front, slip, brioche knit, front and slip, and then just knit that last stitch. So now we're ready for our return row, our contrast side. So we're just going to pull that loop down, make sure we're working into the stitch. So the needle is behind the yarn's in front, slip that first stitch, yarn between the needles to the back to brioche knit. And then we're going to slip yarn over, brioche knit 4 times. Once, twice, 3 times, and slip yarn over, brioche knit. That's our 4th. And here you can see we're at our 3 stitches for the increase. So yarn forward, slip the first one, knit the second one, yarn forward and slip that third one. Now we're going to brioche knit and slip one yarn over to that last stitch. So yarn front, slip, brioche knit, then bring your yarn front between the needles and just slip that last stitch. So that's our second lot of increases and decreases done in the pattern. So again we're going to work plain brioche ribbing and we're going to do 3 repeats again. So we've got a main side, a contrast side, main side, contrast side, main side, contrast side, plain brioche ribbing. So I just slip one yarn over and brioche knit. All the way along for 6 rows, so that's 3 repeats. So those 20 steps create our repeat. So if you want to create a longer piece like this one, just keep repeating those 20 rows as many times as you like. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Look out for our next ones where we'll be doing some more complex increase and decreases and also moving into 2-colour brioche.